It is time for the clash. Joining me, going head-to-head in a clash of minds, is GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and also political commentator Suzanne Evans. So let's kick things off. Remember, you can join in gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GB News. First, Lee Anderson has been offered a place in the Reform Party by Nigel Farage after he was stripped of the Conservative whip. Nigel remarked that the party would open up its doors into saying, I just think Lee has a very good heart. He's still relatively new at politics. He's had a few ups and downs, but I think his heart is in the right place and he'd be a massive help to the cause. He'd probably feel happier in Reform than he is in the current Conservative Party. So would you advise Lee Anderson to join Reform UK? Right, let's see what my clashers think of that. I'm going to start with you, Susanna.
Well, of course, I'm someone who was asked by Nigel Farage to join UKIP a few years ago. So Lee's, I suppose, in a similar kind of situation, although I hadn't been chucked out of the Conservative Party at that stage, which, of course, is effectively what's happened to Lee. Although I suspect if he decides to stay with the Conservatives, it will only be temporary. So will he do it? I guess that's up to him. There's nothing to stop him doing it. People get very exercised about people jumping parties. But what they forget is that Lee Anderson was elected as an MP as Lee Anderson and not as a Conservative. He might have had Conservative on the ballot paper, but when it comes to electoral law, it's he who was elected. So effectively, he has the right to be in whichever party he chooses to be, or no party at all. Is it worth his while? I don't know. He's not got a very big majority as a Conservative. He's got short of a 6,000 majority. The local independents are snapping at his heels. He might not feel it's worth the risk. He might think he'll struggle to get re-elected as a Conservative, but perhaps he'd struggle even more at Reform. They're not exactly at the moment, riding high in the polls. Reform is popular among a certain wing of the population.
I think where Lee Anderson is in Ashfield, I think that they probably snap at him if he joins Reform. I think
he might well.
I think Ashfield, they've elected the man, not the party. But what do you think, Nigel?
Well, I think that Nigel Farage is right. He probably would be happier in Reform than he would be with the Conservative Party. It really depends on what Lee wants to do next. I mean, I think that unless he apologises...
Why should he, though? He's not sorry about...
Well, he's clearly not sorry, but what we now...
Say it just to make people...
What we now know is that this wasn't a slip of the tongue. Otherwise, if it had been, he'd have apologised for it.
But why should he, though, if he's not sorry?
Well, I mean...
even if you said he has to apologise and then we'll give it back to him... But then it's just a disingenuous apology that people are calling for.
Well, it would seem to be the fact he hasn't apologised. And that's what I mean. If it had been a slip of the tongue and he thought, I didn't really express myself terribly well, I would have chosen those words differently if I'd had a chance to, that would be fine. I mean, at the moment, Lee Anderson doesn't have any political career left. So without an apology, he won't have the Tory whip. It won't be restored. He won't be able to stand in Ashfield at the general election.
I don't know if that's true, though, because we've had several cases before when people have lost the whip. They haven't necessarily apologised, but it's been restored. I'm thinking, for instance, in the Conservative Party, of those MPs that decided they were going to oppose Brexit. They all lost the whip. They all were taken back into the party without having to apologise.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't all taken back. That's the point. Some were taken back.
Some left.
Yeah.
But it can happen then, so it's...
Well, you could restore the whip, but in a situation like this, we've actually got a real issue about saying sorry. A bit like Jeremy Corbyn is now out of the Labour Party. So
but there are lots more reasons why Jeremy Corbyn was out of the Labour Party. I mean, Lee is saying what a lot of people are thinking, but haven't been dared to express it.
OK, but I mean, that obviously it's a value judgment whether you think what he said was Islamophobic and racist. Personally, I do. And obviously the Conservative Party, the Chief Whip, has taken the same view, which is why he lost the whip, unless he effectively retracted those words and said sorry for saying them. So when it comes down to the original question, why not join the Reform? Why not join Reform? Again, the same problem applies, that Reform, even if they maintain their current support at around 10-13%, they won't return a single MP to Westminster after the general election.
I think that's right, and that perhaps he's taking the view that he's done his time in politics. He's got a very high profile here on GB News. He's a very popular presenter. Maybe he's decided he's had enough after one short term in office. That is not unheard of. He might be very comfortable at home in Reform. He might feel he has more of an ideological connection with the Reform Party rather than the Conservative Party, as it has become. I think I like to think that a lot of us have achieved a lot in politics without actually being elected. It's possible.
Won't he be, though, if he does say, OK, he switched to Reform, won't he be their only MP in Parliament now? Because until the end of the Conservative
Yes, that's
term.
right. I mean,
so he'll be in
yeah.
Parliament. And if he wins his seat with Reform, then he could be an MP.
He would carry
there
on,
as well.
yes.
And I think he's more likely to keep his seat if he leaves the Conservative Party and joins Reform, would you not say?
Well, I mean, certainly he would remain. He can change parties while he's an MP. He would then be the MP for Reform all the way through to the general election. But at the moment, the way the polls are looking, under the first past the post system, he probably, almost certainly, wouldn't get elected.
He might have a better chance if he did what Douglas Carswell and Mark Reckless did when they left the Conservative Party and joined UKIP, and they stood down and held by-elections in their constituencies. And, of course, both of them were originally returned to Parliament in those
And Douglas Carswell did win at the general election with the one UKIP MP.
Yeah.
But bear in mind, you had 15% in those days of the vote.
I don't know.
So
I think, looking at the two parties that seem almost exactly the same, the Tory party and the Labour party feel like two socialist parties, which is something that Richard Tice alluded to. I think that actually Lee Anderson might probably have a better chance to win his seat with Reform, because I don't think the Tories are going to get very far.